What is up, everybody? Alex from ANAK Creates here. Welcome back to another video, and for those of you who are new here, welcome. Today, I'm gonna go through how I record my guitars. Guitars have always been a big part of my productions, and I am a guitar player. I play rock music. That's what I play, that's what I gravitate towards. And I've had the pleasure and honor of working with a lot of rock producers who really hone in on the guitar sound. So I wanted to kind of talk about how I do my guitar sounds nowadays for my own personal stuff. I have a lot of different ideas coming forth with videos to do with the good way that I record guitars, the different methods that I use, and I have some different things that I've picked up along the way, some not, traditional just plug and play kind of methods. So I might make kind of a little bit of a series out of this in a way, a thematic series, I guess, of guitars and how I do guitars. But first of all, I thought I should start with actually how I record my guitars. Typically, this isn't the only way to record guitars. This isn't the only way that I record guitars, but this is kind of where I start when I'm writing my own stuff, when I'm producing my own stuff. This is kind of the beginning of this, opening up this discussion of guitar recording and how I do that. So today I'm going to just kind of walk through the gear that I use, the basic kind of setup that I have, and then I'm also going to go into Pro Tools and show you the basic layout of tracks and how I actually capture and organize my stuff as I'm recording, because that I always find is where people start to kind of fall apart a little bit and what takes a lot of time. And I pride myself in being able to record very quickly and in an organized fashion, especially when I'm engineering and Pro Tools opping for other sessions as well. So let's dive into it. So to give a bit of context, this setup started when I actually lived in an apartment building. Of course, you can't have a bunch of big amps and a bunch of guitar tower. You just can't make a lot of noise. I was working at a studio, but of course I couldn't record all my guitars there. I needed a setup that I could get great sounding stuff and I could use it wherever I needed to, but also fit my lifestyle. And at the time, that was an apartment building. And now here in my production suite that I have right now, same kind of thing. I've always been able to record guitars and be creative wherever I need to be because of this setup. And it still sounds absolutely amazing. Now, I've worked with tons of different bands that have more gear than most of us can even fathom. So I've had the pleasure of being able to try different amps and try a ton of different stuff, but I still really like my own personal setup for when I'm working on my own stuff, for the way that I produce, for being able to travel, being able to do stuff anywhere I please, and the sound, which is the most important part, sounds amazing. So, can't argue with that and the flexibility associated with it. My setup is actually quite simple, but yet it sounds amazing and is very versatile and works really well for the way that I produce guitars. So, what do I use? My main guitar that I write with, that I do a lot of recording with, is my Fender Telecaster. And I've just used this for quite a while. I was really excited when I first got this. I just love the way it sounds, very crisp and clean, but can do some versatile things as well when I kind of mess it up with different guitar sounds, but it still cuts. Now, the other thing that I have on this guitar and that I use on a lot of different guitars is this thing, which is a fret wrap. It's a fuzzy little thing. I don't know if you can really see that, but basically what it does is it just wraps around your headstock on your guitar and just mutes the strings up here at the top so that when you're playing lead stuff and things where there aren't open strings, it doesn't ring unwanted noise and harmonics that you don't need. So this is really helpful. So this is my main workhorse guitar, my Fender Telecaster, and this is nicknamed Chicken because it's yellow, and I have worked with a bunch of bands who call theirs Chicken, so mine adapted that same name. Shout out to Billy Talent for that one. The second main guitar that I use is this guy, which I've had forever. This was actually the second guitar that I ever bought. And this is a Epiphone Les Paul model baritone guitar. So this is actually a baritone, and I use it for really low stuff. I like to use it for big rhythm stuff. It's just a thicker sounding guitar. It's a little messier. It's not as crisp. It doesn't cut through as well as Chicken. But because it's a baritone, I can add a lower octave to some of the chords that I do. If they're too high, then I can still add some extra thickness because this is a baritone. So this is my second main guitar. So between those two guitars that I use on a daily basis, I also borrow stuff from friends or rent stuff depending on the project that I'm working on and whatnot. But that being said, I am still looking for more guitars because I do love more guitars and want more of them. So that's a... So the next thing in the chain is the amp. What do I use for amps? Well, I actually don't have any amps of my own. I used to have amps. I've used so many different amps over the years, and I love amps. When I work at studios, we like to just crank amps and get the tubes really rumbling and the speakers really vibrating, and I can't do that in my own situation. So I have been using for years an FX XL2. I personally absolutely love the FX, and this is not sponsored, I wish. With the FX, you don't have to actually capture any sounds. You just use what's built in. They have a ton of amps built in, and they sound absolutely amazing. They have a bunch of amps, a bunch of cabinets, a bunch of pedals and effects. Now, I personally wasn't a big fan of many of the cab IRs that they have in there, so I actually took my own using cabinets I was familiar with at studios as I worked on them, through microphones that I like, through the console, through the gear that I like to use, through the preamp. So I got a really good sound for the cab IRs that I like and I know. Now, I am working on a cabinet IR pack to put out, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Early on, a lot of people were very skeptical of how the FX sounded, so I did some tests where I did the cab IRs, and then I put that in the FX, and then set up that cabinet, the same cab I just IR'd, a real head, and then the virtual head in the FX, and I put them A/B, so I had the guitar going into both, and then I could A/B on the console back and forth. A bunch of us sat there and literally A/B'd back and forth to see how it would compare. And we did this with a Diesel VH4 and a couple other ones. So like amps that have a very signature sound and are very expensive, and not a lot of people have them just sitting around. So I actually got to test them with a bunch of those kinds of amps. And the overall consensus was they didn't sound any different. People could not tell which one was which after we dialed them in a little bit. So what I mean by that is that the knobs on the real VH4 and the FX VH4 weren't the exact same. But that being said, if you had two VH4 heads beside each other, they wouldn't be the exact same either. But it was close enough that we were all like, yeah, we can't tell. This sounds really good. It also works really well alongside real amps. So I did a project where we had a bunch of real amps, and then we had some layers of real amps, and then we had an FX was one of the layers, and it fit in perfectly. It was just like another amp. So that was actually the first time I'd ever heard one, and that sold me completely that I could use it and I wasn't compromising any sound quality or mixing quality down the line, that I wasn't gonna have any problems. And since then, I absolutely love it. Now, I like to use the pedals in the FX, but I do use real pedals as well with the FX, and the way that the input works with the impedance, it just works. It actually drives the amp a little bit like the pedal would actually drive an amp if you plugged it into a real amp. I don't know how they did it, but I gotta say it works. And I've done the same kind of sounds with real amps and with the FX, and there's no compromise. First off, I always capture a clean DI. So my guitar goes into a radial JDI and then goes into Pro Tools. Then the throughput of the DI goes into whatever pedals I'm using, if I'm using any, and then straight into the FX. Now, out of the FX, there are actually 4 main outputs that I do tend to use. So most of the time I just record like the left output, the main mono output, because if I was recording a real amp, I would just have one signal. And I mix microphones and stuff like that, but I want one signal. I want the committed sound. So that's what I do with the FX. But the FX also has a secondary set of outputs that you can use as an effects loop. So what I will do sometimes is when I want to add reverbs or delays into my sound, then I'll actually have those go out that effects output. Then I record that onto a stereo track in Pro Tools. I don't do that a lot. I typically do a lot of effects after the fact in Pro Tools because I like to control them. It's easier for editing, all that kind of stuff. But if I actually really want them captured, I have it all wired up. So the way that I have it all wired up in my studio right now is my main interface is an Apollo Twin, and I've just been using that for a long time. Then I have the PreSonus Digimax LT, which is a light pipe set of preamps and converters, 8 channels, that goes in via ADAT to my Apollo. And then my FX and the DI are all wired up straight into that, and they permanently stay there. So they're just always connected to that PreSonus unit. And I've just had that for so long, I haven't updated, and it works. They sound fine. It's really easy. They're connected. They used to be in a rack together, so they were just always together. It works, and I just want it to be clean, and that thing doesn't really color the sound and do much bad to the sound. It works well for what I need it for. And then I also have a keyboard pedal hooked up so that triggers the tuner, and the tuner cuts off the sound. So if I have a really noisy sound, it can mute the sound as well as give me a tuner. And I have found the tuner on the FX is really accurate and easy to use. So I like it. So that's my overall setup outside of Pro Tools. Now I'm going to dive into Pro Tools and show you the different tracks that I use and just an overview of how I actually capture the guitar. I'm using Pro Tools, but this same kind of system can work for basically any DAW. I'm not going to go too in-depth on my whole philosophy when tracking guitars and that kind of thing. I'll do that in a future video, how I produce guitars, so leave a comment down below if you have any questions about that. But for now, I'm just going to show you an overview of the tracks and the way that I record guitars in an organized fashion. So in Pro Tools, what I have is my main record guitar track right here. So it's just, as you can see, the left mono input and the DI guitar track below it. And what I do with this is I actually have the main guitar track that I'm recording on going out an output that I can hear when I play back and punch in and all that kind of stuff. And then the guitar DI is going out just a bus that goes to nowhere. It's just an internal bus in Pro Tools. It just goes to nowhere. Then I never have to hear the DI, but it's always recorded. I can see it. It's active, that kind of stuff. So I have that. I've named the I/O in Pro Tools, so I actually have AXFX main left, AX DI. I've named the inputs because that's literally all they are. They're always hooked up to the PreSonus unit, so they're always the exact same thing. The main guitar record track, and then below it, I have the guitar pull-down tracks, as I like to call them. And the pull-down track, so as I record a guitar on here, so I record it, let's say I just recorded this, then I can take it and I pull it down to here. Then I can hear it and I double it. And then once I double it, I then pull this down and I have now my doubles. I will use playlists on the main guitar record track to save stuff that I want, but on these guitar tracks, I don't typically, if something's on there, it's good, it's been saved, I've decided that this is a good take that I want to use and double it all. I like labeling really well, but in the heat of recording, I don't want to have to label every track with different sounds and whatnot. So I use the comments feature in Pro Tools to do that. So right here, you can see it says Marshy, which is one of the AXFX sounds that I use, that I've named. And I will also put in here what guitar I'm using. If there's pedals, I will put the pedals in here as well. And then when I'm done, after I've recorded and after I've like taken a breather for a minute, I will go name these tracks so that I actually have the real names of this stuff baked right into the track name, because the comments are kind of useless in that way. I can't see them when I import track data and all that kind of stuff. So I will go and name guitar.telly. WMD is one of the pedals that I have here, Marshy. And then that's the guitar name, and I will just take that and copy it, and then the DI is just .DI. And I'll go through that, and .double is the doubles of stuff. I just make sure that it's baked into the track name itself, what the guitar is, what the pedals are, and what the sound on the AXFX was. It's one of the reasons I really like the AXFX, because I can save sounds with names and recall them, export those sounds and put them with the session files and all that kind of stuff as well. It's really helpful to know that I always have those recalls saved with the session. I don't have actual physical pieces of paper. I've done so much of that. So this is kind of an overview of the tracks that I actually use in Pro Tools and how I record and pull down the tracks in there. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. But anyway, that is a look into how I record guitars, my basic setup, my guitars that I use, my amp that I like to use, and my basic way that I actually track in Pro Tools, and just overview of how I do it. Now, this is not the be-all end-all. This is not the only way I record guitars. This is just a good starting point that I use on a lot of my songs, and especially when I'm writing, this is the template tracks that I use to just get started and be able to work really fast, really easily. And that's just why I love this setup and why I've used it for years, and it's just always held up. Really works for my creativity, so I haven't had any reason to change it. And if you want to hear any of this stuff, of course, in action, you can go check out the music that I have on this channel. There's going to be more added to that, but I have a couple covers and an original that just came out, so go check that out. But that is it for this video, guys. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Until then, always be creating.